You just finished undergrad, or you've been working for a while now and have decided to pursue a Master of Public Health degree. But what do you need to know before submitting your application, and how do you stand out? In this episode, we'll be sharing our experience to help guide you as you prepare your MPH applications.
This is the Public Health Insight Podcast.
Before we move on, it is important to note that the views expressed in this podcast are our own and do not represent any of the organizations we work for or are affiliated with.
You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in the fields. My name is Gordon, your host for this episode, along with fellow co-host LaShawn. LaShawn, what's going on?
Man, it's been an interesting couple of weeks at work, personal life, just meeting people, meeting friends from high school, university, and catching up with people who I haven't spoken to or interacted with for over 2 years. So it's been fun.
Awesome.
What about you?
Yeah, things have been going well. Interesting at work. As far as we're concerned, we just found out that the vaccines in Canada are authorized for use in children 5 to 11. So you can imagine working in a health unit, things are a little bit hectic.
So what sort of stuff do you have to do once not necessarily just this news about vaccines being announced for children, but what typically do you do when a big announcement's made all of a sudden?
Yeah, the biggest thing is more on the communication, knowledge translations, and just basically how do we communicate to people that the vaccines are safe and effective.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you learned from kind of your other approaches of targeting the adult population, but how have some of that kind of differed for this other target population?
Yeah, right. It's parents,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a parent, and it's one thing to make a decision for yourself, but parents are, protective of their children.
Yep.
So it's a different type of approach that we would use. Not sure how well it's going to work, but it's a little bit sensitive when you're asking to vaccinate their children. Even though vaccines are common, there's a bunch of MMR vaccines that you have to get when children are at a young age. But something like COVID, where there's a perception that this was developed really fast, some parents are hesitant for good reasons, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's a very exciting and intense time for you then.
Intense. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of PHI, because PHI is our one of the things that we're passionate about. So any updates, any exciting updates you want to share recently?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know where to start, but most recently, I guess we had the opportunity to be guest lecturers at the Colorado School of Public Health to teach MPH classes. Myself, you, Gordon, Linda, and Bindra had the chance to, create this innovative case-based lecture focusing on harm reduction. And so it was very interesting working with you all to create this lecture and design it and learn from our experiences of doing it last year to kind of implement that and see how the students responded to that and the feedback they gave. And I mean, overall, I think people were really excited. We had a lot of participation. People were engaging in the topics. Gordon, you and myself love project management, so we got to incorporate a lot of tools and techniques from that aspect and domain and incorporate that into public health practice. So that was very exciting. What did you think? How do you think it went?
Yeah, like you said, the project management piece, part of the lesson plan, we incorporated a class activity where we used some stakeholder analysis tools, namely the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. And we also used the health equity impact assessment tool as a program evaluation tool as far as the needle exchange program that was outlined in the case that we presented. So that's, just to have some variety in a classroom, use different scenarios that a student would go out and apply in the real world when they are employed. So we just wanted to make sure it was relevant to what they might be doing when they leave the
No,
classroom.
for sure. And the interesting thing is, all the people who are guest lecturing for that specific are practicing public health professionals. And so we kind of made it such that we were teaching them some of the stuff that we were doing in our different workspaces so that they do get this kind of cutting edge, practical skill set rather than learning about things that, and as students, we often learn about things that we're like, what the heck is this? Like, when will I ever use it? And, sometimes you don't use
Mm-hmm.
it, and that sucks, right? So we really
Mm-hmm.
wanted to key in on that and understand what students could take away from it and apply to multiple scenarios, not just within the context of harm reduction, but across the public health and global health spectrum.
Of course. And if you can't tell by now, LaShawn and I are very passionate about supporting the next generation of public health practitioners. And we've heard through the grapevine anyway that application season is approaching or is here. So part of what we want to do for this episode is just to talk about, preparing those applications and how to maximize your MPH.
Sounds
Anything
good.
you want to say about that, LaShawn? What about when you were applying for MPH? How did that go? Was it terrifying?
It was. I mean, I think it's always kind of nerve wracking when you're applying to any programs, just wondering if, you got everything you need to submit, whether it's the different components of that specific application, whether uh, you have what it takes to actually get accepted, or is this like a long shot? Like a bunch of different things go through your head when you're applying, and similar things went through my head when I was applying to the program at Western MPH. There's different components that you need to make sure you hit, different targets, whether it's GPA, etc. But I it's it's always the thing I'd like to say is it's always nice to learn from other people's experiences, and that's kind of why we wanted to talk about this topic today, because Gordon and I have both gone to this Western MPH program, and we've chatted with other students, whether it's at the Colorado School of Public Health, MPH programs, prospective students from India, the US, Argentina, Germany,
Okay.
and the UK as well. And we've gotten feedback, and we've kind of compiled a list of common questions and concerns that individuals have, and we wanted to not just stop there and kind of hide that knowledge. We wanted to kind of share that with our audience, because these are questions we get emailed to us all the time. So we wanted to kind of put it all in a podcast and let you have access to it forever.
Right. Yep. Completely agree. And on that note, what are some of if you're a prospective applicant or a prospective MPH student, what are some of those things that you should probably look into before you even start applying?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you should look into. I mean, geographically speaking, do you want to stay within your like local area, your city, your country, or do you want to go abroad and explore different options that they have there? You could also think about different program styles, like, whether it's an straight up a master's of public health program, or is it a master's of science in public health? Because there is a distinction. Gordon, do you want to speak a bit more about that distinction?
Yeah, I know from what we've heard from folks doing different types of programs, even there's case or course-based masters, and there's some that are more thesis research-based. From what I'm told, there are some MPH programs that are thesis-based as well, but by and large, the Master of Science in Public Health programs tend to be more on the thesis-based side. So if
Yeah.
you're into the research part of public health, perhaps you would look into that kind of program if it's available. And if you're maybe into more of the applied practice side, maybe you look into more of an
hmm
MPH. But a day, I believe you can still end up at the same place having done either one. So it's not a critical distinction, but if it's just from a pure learning experience, right? If you enjoy learning about
Yeah.
research, maybe you look into MSc Public Health. And if you're more, how do I apply this tool and looking at cases, maybe you look more towards
I like that you said that it's a more the MPH degree is a more practice focused degree, and one of the main components that are usually found within those programs is a practicum placement, where you would have
right.
like a 3 to 4 month or even sometimes longer period of time where you work at a public health or global health organization, putting the skills that you learned from the courses into practice. And so, Gordon, was that one of the reasons why you decided to do an MPH over an MSc in public health?
That's a good question. So earlier we were talking about what was it like for you when you applied? For me, I had other plans, didn't quite work out, and I was exploring avenues that I could take my career into. And I remember a friend always telling me about public health. And when I looked into it, the application deadline was a week from when I realized that I was interested in doing it. So I just essentially, I didn't have too much time to think about case base, this and that. It's like what I said, life's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. That was my situation where I'm gonna apply. I trusted my one friend who told me it was a good experience, and I just went with that. And it ended up being a good experience. But yeah, it's one of those where I went to Western before, so I felt some sort of comfort and safety in
Mm,
that, it was a program and that it would be recognized once you're finished. And that's another thing to consider as well. From my experience, I'm not too sure of any discrimination as far as Master of Public Health goes when, depending on the credibility and the prestige of a school. But if that's something that's important to you, then it's important to you. So,
yeah, I mean, that's definitely something to consider. And I know people make a big deal about, the university rankings and MPH program rankings, but, you know, beyond that, at the end of the day, for me, what I think is most important is that you're feeling comfortable in a program that you think you can gain a lot out of to help advance your career. And believe that you can make the best out of a situation in any case,
right.
depending on how you tailor that, of course.
When I was applying too, so I applied to two. I applied to
Hmm.
Western and Brock
Hmm.
University. I got into both. Brock was way cheaper, but fully online at the time, even before
Hmm.
COVID. And that was the second year. I would have been in the second cohort of Brock, and I felt like there wasn't enough historical data to see how graduates performed. So that was a big factor, even though it was 3 times as expensive to go to
Hmm.
Western. I felt comfortable knowing that students were able to get practicum, students were getting jobs, and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, I also found out that the Brock program is more focused on professionals who've been working for years in the space and they just want to
Hmm.
enhance their sort of leadership skills, public health practice skills. So then they take a different type of applicant than a Western. So those are some of the things to look into, like what level of experience do you need before you start a program?
No, for sure. Like I think you touched on amazing points, the cost aspect of it and kind of that who is this program actually designed for? You don't necessarily,
Hmm.
as a recent graduate of undergrad, want to go into a program that's fully designed for mid to late career professionals because I think that
Right.
you might feel lost at certain stages because they expect you to apply your practical experiences from work. And I think, you know, maybe you could consider waiting a couple years or maybe look elsewhere for a different program like Gordon mentioned, like a Western MPH type program where they like having a mix of early career professionals, mid career professionals, and late career professionals, which actually, in my opinion, creates a really interesting and engaging environment.
Agreed. And talk about some other differences like,
Yeah.
generalization and specialization. How important is that? How important of a role did that play in your DCH?
Yeah, this is a question that we always get. And you know what? It depends. For example, if you have background in public health and you know you want to do and focus on a specific area like health policy, health promotion, epidemiology, and you are set on doing that and you know you want your career path to be aligned with one of those specific areas, then there are MPH programs available that allow you to specialize right off the bat and go into more in depth into courses such as epidemiology, advanced methods in epidemiology, biostatistics, etc. Right? They also do have some foundational courses. So you will be getting like your core courses in social determinants of health and introduction to public health. So you will be getting those in those courses, but courses will be geared towards that specialization. Now, on the other hand, if you are like me, for example, and didn't really have a kind of specialization that I wanted to get into, then that's where you should start considering that generalization stream. So the program at Western MPH, for example, is a generalized program. They have, I think, 18 different courses across the spectrum of public health, whether it's social determinants of health, environmental science, epidemiology, public health and computer science. These are all, and health economics, these are all a broad range of courses to really kind of introduce you to public health. And then based on those courses, you could kind of decide, hey, I like environmental health and the public aspects related to that. I want to pursue, for example, my practicum placement in that area. Or after I graduate, now that I'm exposed to environmental health, I'm going to go down that stream. But before you went into the program, you wouldn't have known that because you weren't introduced to that specific aspect of public health. And that's kind of why I chose the general stream, because I really wanted to learn everything there was to public health and not kind of just push myself into a specialization before I knew what that specialization was. Now, with that in mind, even though you do a specialization, it does not exclude you from the fact to go on and pursue a specialization in epidemiology through your professional experiences or internships. So you can still go that route, but it's just kind of a different route to go.
So you're saying you can generalize and then kind of specialize through actually working
Exactly.
later, even though it may or may not be a little bit more difficult to break in, but it's not the end of the world if you do it
Yeah,
that
like
way.
in my case, I did a master's of public health that was generalized, and then I really enjoyed the global health aspects within that space. So then I went on to specialize in global health. So something similar to that is possible. You can just learn everything and then specialize after. But it really depends on your preferences. What was your situation like, Gordon? Did something similar happen to you?
So the biggest factor for me, as you can tell from the two programs I applied to, was the duration of the program. So I had been out of undergrad for 4 years. Yeah, about 4 years. And then I've been working for that time. So when I was thinking about going back to school, I was not excited about doing something that was 2 years or longer, because my goal was to get the training I needed to go into the workforce and as soon as possible. So for me, 12-month programs were the only option. And I'm aware that there's some a bit longer, 18 months, 24 months, that might, for people who are not so much in a rush that they don't have to do an accelerated master's, that might be something that's for them. But I think, yeah, it depends on what stage you are in your learning or your working career, and that might inform which of those options are more ideal for you.
Yeah, and again, oftentimes what you find is if you do that Master's of Science in Public Health and have that thesis and research-based component, it's probably going to take a bit longer because you have to do like data collection, you need to defend your thesis, and all that preparation and hard work that goes into that aspect of that specific program. So that kind of extends the time you have to, complete that, and adds more components to. Another thing that we should consider when talking about Master of Public Health programs is this idea of accreditation. And one of the accreditations that come into mind when talking about public health MPH programs is the accreditation by the Council on Education for Public Health, CEF.
It's a US-based council, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what is that?
Yeah, it's one of those accrediting bodies for public health where the public health programs are expected to meet a set of requirements, obviously learning requirements, pedagogical setup, and they would essentially there's a whole rigorous application process to
By the program,
demonstrate
right?
by the program to demonstrate that
Yeah.
the framework essentially is in line with what the expectations are, and then they would get an accreditation. Now the question becomes, why is this important? Why is this something people should be thinking of when they're applying?
Yeah, so like any sort of accreditation body, they want to create standardization and making sure that across different programs, whether it's in the US or Canada or Mexico, the things that are being taught are consistent and evidence-based. So what this accreditation basically ensures is that there are certain competencies throughout the different courses that are taught that are in line with that standard or that framework. And so what you'll find with these accredited schools is they often have a list of competencies that they will make sure you will gain out of doing and completing the program. And a couple of important aspects to do that is that course component, that practicum component, and that knowledge synthesized activity, and it's different depending on the school. You could do a synthesis of a case, you could do a synthesis of all your learnings, you could do a synthesis based on your practical experience, and it's very much up to the specific program as to how they want to do that kind of final project component. But taking into consideration all three of these components, develop these competencies that are expected of any CEF accredited school.
All right, so I'm in the process of looking for a program. I'm scrolling down the list to make sure everything's CEF accredited. And, maybe is it safe to assume that the non-CEF accredited schools aren't good? Is that an assumption? Why is it important to the applicant to know if it's CEF accredited? How does that inform their decision? Or should it inform their decision?
Yes and no. I think this accreditation is just a good standardization across MPH programs. And in the United States, a bunch of different schools of public health have this accreditation. But that doesn't mean a school that doesn't have this accreditation is not a good school. So they maybe have different pedagogy or teaching methods that they think are more useful and beneficial.
Right.
And that is true. That might be true. Right? So it just depends on your situation. And one of the things that should be pointed out is many different doctoral programs in public health, they would actually require you graduating from some CEF accredited school just because it shows that that standard has been kept and met. So a lot of schools in the United States, like if you're looking into a Doctor of Public Health program, DRPH, they would prefer that you went to one of these accredited schools. However, there are options if you weren't a graduate from one of these accredited schools. You could take additional courses to show that you have that knowledge. So there are kind of ways to make up for the fact that you didn't go to a CEF accredited school. But you know what? Not a lot of people are going to be pursuing doctoral degrees in public health. So if that's not a concern for you, then maybe it doesn't matter so much.
So the key message there is if you've already decided that you want to pursue something after an MPH, or if you want to have your options open, if you have access to a CEF accredited program, perhaps that's something you should put some thought into. Is that kind of what you're saying? However, it's not necessarily make or break.
Yeah, I mean, you will learn all the necessary public health skills to be a very competent public health professional, I believe either way. So, I mean, this accreditation basically is a seal, a stamp that ensures you will get that.
And another thing as well, in the States, they have a certification called Certified Public Health.
Yeah, Certified Public Health Professional, it's the CPH.
Yeah.
And basically, that's a certification that you can apply for and write the exam for if you have done your MPH from one of these certified or accredited schools. And that certification basically is another kind of stamp of, hey, I know what I have to know to be a very good public health professional in this field. And you are consistently committing yourself to doing modules and pursuing learning opportunities to keep that certification maintained. And that's kind of another stamp of approval to make sure that everything that you learned is up to date.
Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our content and would like to stay up to date, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. To learn more about our community initiatives and how you can support us, visit our website at thepublichealthinsight.com. Join the PHI community, and let's make public health viral.